How do architects and interior architects differentiate? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah. So I guess to give a little bit of background, I mentioned this to Ethan when I joined, but I am actually a graduate from K-State Interior Architecture. So when I was in school, KU did not offer an interior architecture program. So I'm super excited that that's something that is available to, everyone attending KU and in the College of Architecture. So some of my answers may be a little bit more specific to my experience at K-State, but reading up on what KU is offering, I think they're very similar programs. So my experience as far as the difference between, architect and interior architect is, as it implies, a little bit more attention on the interior environment. Still a lot of the same architecture classes as a base, but then moving forward, more emphasis on space planning. At K-State, the interior architecture program wasn't super heavy on, colors and fabrics. That was more the interior design school. So it's really more spatially the interior, the layout of it, and the experience of the occupants.
Awesome. So where, kind of elaborating a little bit more on that, where does the design of the architecture stop or the architect stop and the interior architect begin? Or is it much more of a blending of the two?
Yeah, I think it's definitely more of a blend, and some of it may depend too on the scale of the project. So a lot of the projects that I work on are smaller TI, tenant improvement projects. So in that case, really there's not a formal architect on board. It's really just interior, fit out of a space versus a large project, thinking about, schematic and design development, the architect really doing more of the building overall form, and then the interior architect helping with that interior layout and the scope within those, exterior walls. And to add to that too, I think you can go a lot of paths with interior architecture, and that's one reason I chose it. A lot of people go more the interior design route and get licensed as an interior designer, where other people go more the architecture route and become a licensed architect. There's even people I graduated with that do more industrial design, even set design, product design. So I feel like there's a pretty broad range of career choices with interior architecture. So I think depending on kind of which path you choose specific to, licensure, you may take on a bigger role in the architecture side or the interior design side.
Awesome. So going off of that a little bit more as well, what would you say is your proudest moment of being an interior architect?
For me, my favorite part about the profession as a whole is really relationships with clients. So I think that's the same for architecture or interior architecture. But, a lot of my role is, getting to know clients, building a program for their projects, and then working with them through the life of the project. And to me, that's one of the greatest things about what I do is just those relationships and seeing how happy they are at the end of the project with the end result.
Awesome. What would you say, going off of the favorite and kind of mirroring that, what would you say is the most challenging part of your job?
Oh, it's kind of the same answer. Sometimes you get really challenging clients. There's great clients, and then there's some that really push you to your limits and can be more difficult to work with. But I always like a challenge. So, sometimes you get a client that may not have the vision. And it's exciting to me to be able to solve that problem and still deliver a project that they're excited about. I think one of the other, challenges, or maybe something that's not the most glamorous side of the business, is, the accounting and billing and contracts. And again, I think that kind of spans both, professions as far as interior architecture or architecture. But at least I felt like in school, they didn't focus a lot on that. And depending on what your role is at your job, just taking on some of those more business related tasks.
Awesome. So going a little bit back to interior architecture, what would you say is the most common misconception with interior architects in the field?
I think a lot of people, you hear the term like interior decorator, and to me that's kind of like, oh, that's not what I do. It's so much more than that. And I think interior designers get the same thing. I get frustrated when people are like, oh, you just pick out colors and fabrics, and it's like, oh, no, there's so much more to it. So I think just there's not a great understanding about the profession. And I think going back to KU offering that now, I think as more schools have a program that's more focused on interior architecture, it'll become more widely known, and hopefully those misconceptions will kind of go away.
Then I'm gonna jump over to Olivia, one of our executive board members who's in the IA program. If you want to ask the next question.
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Olivia. Julia and Nana are also in the IA program at KU, just to kind of introduce them. We're third years. So building off the last question, you kind of touched on this, but we talked in class a lot about the confusion and kind of controversy that comes with interior decorator, interior designer, interior architects. So how do you kind of see that difference, and how do you think we can try to flip the perception to establish it as more of a professional degree in professional industry?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too is, even architects, sometimes how they perceive interior designers or even interior architects with the licensure. So I think at KU, it's a little different where it's a 4-year degree and then you can get your master's in architecture. So then you should be able to get, licensed within, Kansas, Missouri, depending on where you live. For me, a big thing was the degree at K-State. I don't have a master's degree. It was a 5-year bachelor's degree. So for me, licensure was much harder because I didn't have a, NCARB accredited degree. And so I feel like that was a big hurdle for me, is just it not being recognized as an architecture degree when I felt like I went to school for 5 years and did everything that everyone in the College of Architecture did. So, I think there's that kind of misconception that's hard to get over. And again, I feel like with more schools offering this, I'm hoping that it becomes something that they recognize is a true, profession and still falls within that College of Architecture. But it's a very fine line between interior architecture and interior design. So I understand sometimes the misconception, but I think going through the program, I see so many differences in the classes that we took and, just the overall experiences that we had.
We actually have another panelist just join. So Olivia, if you want to ask, they just left.
I did for a second.
Yeah, we'll give her, okay. If you want to, Olivia, ask Erica the same question, you can, and maybe we can get a similar, different response.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Erica. Welcome. I'm Olivia. I'm a 3rd-year interior architecture student. And so we just talked to Megan about a few questions, and I was going to repeat the same when you see your opinion. We were kind of talking about the confusion and controversy versus interior architecture, interior design, interior decorating. I was kind of wanting to see your perception on that and how we can kind of change people's perspectives on the differences between those and establish interior design as a professional industry.
Sure. I think initially my understanding of interior architecture and interior design are very similar. They, embody and use a lot of concepts that come from architecture. I would say interior decorating is a bit more Instagram-y based, I suppose, if that makes sense. It's, picking a different fabric for furniture. And yes, that is a faction of interior design, but it requires a lot more knowledge and understanding of the project requirements and also applications in different situations. So you can't use the same furniture in healthcare that you can in workplace. So that would be kind of my initial distinction between them. And then I know that the interior design licensure process is working on kind of formalizing their 3 different exams that they have to take. And those incorporate a lot of content that's actually included in the AIAS. And so I think that will go a long way to help define interior design / architecture as an entity, and then, help show that it, requires a lot of knowledge and qualifications for having that degree. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, to kind of backtrack and let Erica also introduce herself a little bit, if you just want to give a brief kind of explanation on who you are, when you graduated and things along those lines.
Sure. I graduated in 2016 and I moved out to San Francisco in September of 2016. So I've been working at Smith Group in San Francisco for 4 years now. And I've done a mixture of architecture and interior architecture on healthcare and workplace projects in the Bay Area.
Awesome. Then we will go ahead and jump down to the next question. And Erica, if you want to talk about anything else as we start to wrap up this, or once we start to wrap up this, feel free to jump in and say other things. But going off of this, do interior architects generally specialize in one type of space, whether it's residential, retail, health and wellness, or ones of the others? Or what's your experience in the field with yourself and then also other interior architects? And we can jump back over to Megan really quick.
Yeah, I think part of it depends on, the firm that you work for. I feel like it's normally pretty much like commercial and then residential, but if you're within the commercial environment, there's a couple areas that I think are more specialized that Erica touched on. Healthcare is pretty specific, like most firms that do healthcare really focus on that. BRR, where I work, we focus on, retail and, corporate environments, industrial, and a few different things. So I feel like, you can definitely specialize in one, but a lot of firms have a broad mix of markets, so you get to touch a little bit of everything.
Awesome. Erica, do you have any thing you want to expand upon that maybe?
Yeah, I don't know that anyone really interior architects really focus on one specific aspect of interior architecture for their entire career. I know many of the interior architects in my office have gone from healthcare to commercial to residential, and they've been in the field for a while, but they have a broad range of experience. So if you want that, that's available in interior architecture as well. Yep.
Awesome. Going a little bit more towards the school side, since we are all still in school ourselves, what would you say was the best skill you learned in school or out of school that best prepared you for becoming an interior architect? And we'll jump back over to Erica, and then we'll go to Megan right after.
I would say that the best skill I learned in school to apply for that applies to interior architecture is that planning concepts and circulation diagrams are very important in interior architecture and will help define the entire floor plan of the project and help create a concept. So, those, I had mentioned when I just hopped on was that, architectural concepts apply to interior architecture. I think that would be the biggest thing.
Yeah, and Megan, if you want to expand upon that.
Yeah, I think similar, to what Erica mentioned as far as just, kind of concepts, I mentioned at the beginning, to me, one of the biggest roles of the interior architect is just the interior, layout and space planning. So along with that, I think just understanding spatial requirements, code requirements, just basic things so that when you start in the profession, you can really jump in because, I know most jobs, they just kind of throw you in and expect you to be able to lay things out. So really having that spatial knowledge of space and then also code knowledge.
Awesome. So going a little bit broader with this next question, what would you say is the process of starting a new interior architecture project? What's kind of the first thing you start to think about, and how do you develop the project throughout it? And we'll jump back to Megan and then go to Erica.
Yeah, so I think part of it depends on the scale of the project, but thinking about, some of the projects I work on in the commercial environment, the first step is really meeting with the client and understanding their goals and doing, what we would call like a schematic design package. So really looking at, look, feel, programming as far as, spatial requirements, and really just meeting with the client and understanding what their goals are. And I think having that formwork at the beginning then helps really lay out the project for success, throughout the life of it. But really that upfront work of understanding, what does the client want from, a project standpoint. And a lot of our clients don't understand the world of architecture and interior architecture. So, they have a hard time describing concepts and maybe what they're visualizing. So, providing precedent imagery to really give them something to point at and say, that's what I want. I want this look here, is such a critical piece, I think, in the process.
Yeah. Erica, would you like to expand upon the thought process of a project?
Sure. So since I work primarily in healthcare, we usually start off with an overarching concept on our projects. And for instance, my medical office building in South San Francisco right now, we are using the context of the mountains and the local landscape and region to influence our interior architecture. And so the more soothing, cool colors of the water and the ocean surrounding are the colors of the clinic. And then the warmer, kind of more vibrant colors are the are focused in the public spaces in our project. And so I think we always try to ground our concepts for a building, for the interiors, because that helps us focus our energy when we're working later on the project. And also in case of value engineering, it also gives you something to kind of latch onto and say, no, I think this element is much more important than this one, and we should, because it embodies the concept of the design, and it that will help it keep in the project and kind of maintain that quality that you want, versus like something that might be a little bit less important. You can make the cost lower. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's great to understand a little bit of the design process. But out of those design process and out of working on a design process, what would you say is your favorite part of the design process? I know Megan touched a little bit on this with communicating with the client, but maybe other than that, with a little bit more of the design aspects, what would you say? And we'll jump to Erica and then back over to Megan. We're just gonna snake this back and forth.
Yeah. I think my favorite part of the design process is actually design development, because it's like this kind of happy middle ground between schematic and CDs, where things are changing very quickly and you're solving a lot of problems, but you're not yet down into that like nitty gritty detail of like really working out, how does my roller shade interact with the exterior wall and that kind of stuff. And that's fun too. And it's still also very interesting, but I think I like the fast paced like nature of the design development phase.
And Megan, what's your take on the question?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm more on the schematic side. I think I mentioned this early on, but I love space planning, and to me, it's a puzzle. So having a list of spaces and requirements and, a shell of a space, and having to take that and really figure out where everything needs to be laid out and making it work, to me is the most exciting part of the project.
So a little question for maybe any MArch students that are watching, but if you are an MArch student and you would like to maybe pursue interior architecture or like to get more involved in that part of the design process, what would you say is a step they should take to understand that aspect a little more? And we'll snake it back to Megan and then down to Erica.
So I'm not sure if I understand the question. So just getting more involved in the interior architecture side, or?
Yeah, so if like an architect was working at a firm and wanted to get a little bit more of a knowledge and understanding of the interior architecture, what is a step you would recommend them take to do that?
Yeah, I mean, in the firm environment, I think a lot of it is just, mentorship from those who are already doing the work and kind of working through the process. I think one thing we didn't touch on too, as far as, roles of interior architects, is a lot of material selections, not necessarily just color of the walls, but thinking about, the actual materiality of things. So getting more involved with, meeting with reps and understanding materials, how they can be used maybe in different ways, what Erica was mentioning with healthcare, what can be used in a healthcare environment versus, what can be used in, a hotel, and just getting a better grasp on some of those interior concepts.
And Erica, your thoughts on it?
Sure, I would kind of echo that as well. I think we don't focus a lot in architecture school, at least on the materiality on the interior. So we put a lot of big fancy renderings of nice exterior views and the 3,000-foot sky shot of the roof and all the mechanical equipment on the roof. But I think what we really need to work more on in architecture school is honing in on application of different materials and really truly understanding how parts and pieces of a building go together. Because I think it was my project manager. He told me, he was like, really the only difference between an exterior detail and an interior detail is a line of waterproofing. It's just as complicated and it has just as much nuance and like technical knowledge that you need to have to really do it well and do it correctly. And so I think that we could focus more on that in architecture school, is working on the interior in general.
So this is my final question. So after this, if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free. But what is one skill outside of school students, whether they're in the architecture or interior architecture field, can start developing to prepare themselves better for the profession? And we'll start with Erica and then jump back up to Megan.
I would say one skill you could develop is a skill completely unrelated to architecture. So just find something that you're passionate about and find something you're interested in, and have fun with it. I think that you can find a lot of connections between architecture and real life that will translate, and it will become kind of a back and forth between things that you learn in your hobby and the things that you enjoy doing outside of work in architecture will influence the way that you do work as an architect and will probably make you better as well.
And Erica, what's your skill?
Going to me. So I think for me, one big thing is just communication. And, I mentioned it when we started, just the interaction with the clients, being able to speak to clients, work through, issues with clients. So being a good communicator, being able to get in front of people, do a presentation of your ideas and your design is a skill that you can really work on, throughout college and then after. It's something I think we're all looking to improve on throughout our career.
Mm-hmm, definitely, yeah.
So like I said, that's all of my questions. Oh, Julia, go.
Okay, so Olivia and Anna and I are all in the same studio. we're the first year going through KU in the interior architecture program. And our professor this year basically kind of like laid out and has been trying to like tell us the differences between like decorator, designer, and architect or interior architect. And basically what she said, it seems like Olivia and Anna, I don't want to like quote her wrong, so unmute if you want to, but she kind of was explaining the difference between designer and interior designer. But she said an interior architect and an interior designer are the exact same thing, and that we won't be able to use like interior architect as our title once we graduate, because like legally like the architects like own the firm. So are your guys' titles interior architects? And would you also agree with the fact that they're basically the same profession?
That's a tough one. Because again, I think it's so much about, the firm you're working in, what your skill sets are, what your passion is, and what you. I mean, I feel like my schooling was very different from, an interior design school. Just again, with all the architecture classes and structures classes that I had to take. But it might just depend on where you end up after graduation. But I mean, I will say though, there's a lot of people within our firm that have interior design degrees and those that have interior architecture degrees, and a lot of them do the exact same thing. So I'm not sure if there's a true difference. I think both are capable of doing a lot of different things. I mean, as far as title, I don't think there's a true interior architect title. I think you can be a licensed architect. You can take your NCIDQ and be a licensed interior designer, but I'm not aware of like a true interior architect title or licensure, if that's what your question was.
Erica, do you have anything you want to expand upon that, or do you feel like that summed it up pretty well?
Yeah, I would say I don't know if I can speak to like the legality of saying interior architect versus interior designer. I would probably assume just go on the safe side, and before you're technically licensed as an interior architect, just call yourself an interior designer to be safe. But other than that, I would tend to agree that they are pretty much the same in the way that an architectural designer is the same as an architect. So that would be my take on it.
Awesome. Any other questions from any of the students we have here? Feel free to spitball it or go with whatever.
A little bit more of a fun question, but what's the favorite project that you guys have worked on during your career so far?
Favorite project? I really like my project that I'm working on right now. It's a 74,000 square foot medical office building. And it has a mix of medical offices and clinics. So there's a nice kind of back and forth while I'm working between medical planning and like architectural interiors for offices, which are two different things. So that's exciting.
That's a tough one. I've worked on a lot of different project types throughout my career. So I've worked on retail, I've worked on corporate office, I've worked on hotels. So there's kind of specific projects within each one. Right now, we are doing a lot of grocery work, and Whole Foods is a client of ours, and they're just a super fun group to work with. Again, I told you from the beginning, I feel like it's all about clients and kind of who you're working with. But it seems like, just a grocery store, but they do a lot with the interior, architecture of the store, the soffits, the signage design, and there's just a lot of fun things to work with, and they're a great group to work with.
I guess I have a question. So our program, I don't know if you guys know, it's like 4 years, and then we get our interior architecture, and then we have option of doing 2 years to get our master's of architecture. Right now, this is a big debate because it's like, what are you gonna do? Do you continue? I'm leaning more towards the interior. Do you think it would be necessary in this profession to like stick around for the 2, or do you think we could do enough with just our interior architecture degree?
I think it's really what you want to do with it and what your goals are for the future. I think I mentioned, at K-State, mine was a 5-year program. It's not accredited. So, out of school, I, took the NCIDQ and became, a licensed interior designer. But there's ways to, I don't want to say get around it, but certain states you can get your architectural license in. So that's something that, I am pursuing and I'm able to do, even though I don't have that architecture degree. That being said, though, I would say that if you're, really passionate, about the architecture side of things, and want to become a licensed architect in the state of Kansas or Missouri or wherever you're from, then you probably will need to get that, because it's very limited where you can get that licensure if you don't have that accredited degree.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. So, do you know anyone who has that, has both degrees, either that you work with or know of? And does it, my worry would be I get the additional 2 years because I am interested in the architecture side as well, and be put strictly on the architecture side or interior architecture side and have to choose.
At my office, our lead interior architect has a degree in both architecture and interior design. I know that hers is a little different. Her undergraduate degrees in architecture, and then her master's degree is in interior architecture. So I don't know if it will necessarily. I think kind of what it seems like you're concerned about is that you'll be pigeonholed into one or the other. And I don't think that having a degree in both would force you to have to pick. You could definitely fluctuate between the two based on wherever you end up after graduation.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it's, where your skill sets lie, what you're passionate about, and when you're looking for a job, finding a place that's a good fit for what you want to do, and where you see yourself. So I would hope you wouldn't get pigeonholed into just architecture if you were interested in interior architecture, if it's something that you had a passion for.
Do we have any more questions from our guests today? Not seeing any. This is a little shorter than I originally thought, but I think there was still a lot of value that came out of this. I certainly learned a lot more about the interior architecture pathway that I didn't know about, so I appreciate that myself. But yeah, you guys are free to go now. I sincerely thank both Erica and Megan for showing up and being a part of this. We do really appreciate it as students, especially in this time, to still stay in touch with the industry. So.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.